No part of this recording may be used to train generative so-called AI models. Make your own content or pay creators for their work, you opportunistic pathogens. Hello and welcome to the Season 3 finale of Fandom X Archive. I am your host, Dinara Tangri, aka Alien Super Soldier, aka That Krychek Chick. This episode went through so many changes and revisions that what you're about to hear has very little to do with my original idea. And that idea was to find some of the worst and most poorly aged takes about the X-Files that people shared online back when the show was new and make an episode out of it. And by worst and most idiotic takes, I don't mean takes that I disagree with. I'm talking about things like when people on all.tv.xfiles would actively troll the message boards with takes like, "The X-Files sucks," or calling Scully a bitch for being a skeptic. That sounds like fun, right? My whole mantra with Fandom X Archive is that it's supposed to be fun. I'm exploring the history of my all-time favorite TV show, and it's supposed to be exciting as well as informative. So why did I decide it would be a good idea to sift through years of threads on ATX and other message boards looking for the meanest and most uninformed takes? The short answer is authenticity. I can't keep making a podcast about the history of our fandom and only talk about parts that are fun for me, which in itself goes against my mantra, but I guess this is where personal preferences clash with honesty. I have made an episode where I tackled homophobia in the fandom, and that was not fun, but it was important for me, so I did it anyway. Discussing stupid things fans or haters have said about my favorite show is not the same thing, of course, but the process of making such an episode falls within the same category, emotionally. At one point during the early research process, I felt like an archaeologist who was getting angry over something stupid written on ancient stone tablets. Another reason why I had doubts about doing a whole episode about early internet trolls and stupid opinions people had was because it felt a little trashy and gossipy to be taken seriously. Scandalizing and sensationalizing isn't the purview of this podcast. This isn't a tea podcast, is what I'm trying to say. But that was when my pathological need to overanalyze everything and put seemingly shallow things into some larger historical context kicked in, and I thought that it would be fun to take all of those no good, badly aged opinions from over 30 years ago and see what they can tell us about that particular time period. And all of a sudden, I was looking at a project that was too big for one episode to cover, for I was no longer interested in just the negative reviews and opinions. I was interested in conversations and attitudes that fans used to have in the early 90s, and how those conversations and attitudes reflected the cultural zeitgeist. I wanted to try and put those early conversations into a historical and cultural context so that I could have a better understanding of how the fandom developed and how the culture informed the perception of the X-Files, and vice versa. As fun as reading 30-year-old threads sounds, I wanted to have some actual conversations with fans that used to frequent those early message boards and chat rooms. To that end, I joined the X-Files Reddit, something I probably should have done years ago because it's a really cool place. They actually, get this, discuss the show and not just MSR, but like plot lines and character arcs and the music. Oh my. You mean to tell me that there are fan spaces where fans aren't wishing death on Chris Carter or David Duchovny and fawning over paparazzi pics of Gillian Anderson, despite her expressed disapproval of this, might I add? Or politely ignoring you for wanting to discuss something other than MSR for a change, or spamming your feed with AI slop? Also, the best thing about the X-Files Reddit is that they have strict rules against posting AI-generated content. When I saw that, I almost cried. I can make a whole episode just talking about why I believe social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter make bad fan spaces, but for now, I'll settle for this tangent. I really wish I had joined the subreddit sooner, or at least been more proactive in my search for fan spaces that are more inclusive and less, toxic. It would have also made my research process for this podcast much easier. There are a lot of OG X-Files fans on that subreddit that are happy to talk about things like the X-Files marathons they used to run on Fox, and just talk about what it was like to be a fan in the early 90s. Anyway, I asked the Reddit community to share some of the worst and dumbest takes they remember from the early 90s, and the responses that I got are just wonderful. Instead of giving us the tea about the worst fan opinions, they give us a taste of what the conversations about the X Files were at the time, and how the general public was reacting to this new weird show. And with the responders' expressed permission to share their responses, I want to read some of them here. User Genocide Saddle writes, "Oh my goodness, I have a distinct memory of catching snippets of episodes while my parents were watching and being so intrigued, but they'd consistently shoo me away. So I started sneakily watching on the 13-inch rabbit ear TV in my room. During a rerun of Fearful Symmetry, I was busted, and my mom told me to turn it off and go to bed. I sobbed. I think eventually I worked myself up into such a frenzy, she told me to turn the TV back on. I was maybe 11 or 12. I just thought Scully was the coolest. Definitely ended up being a big motivator for me in pursuing higher education, although not in STEM or law enforcement. I would write down words I didn't know and look them up in a literal dictionary the next day. I skipped every Friday night school dance until the show transitioned to Sundays. As I got older, it morphed into a love of linguistics and etymology. An odd thing, maybe given my age at the time, that has always struck me was how corrupt institutions are in the show. I grew up to be fairly anti-prison, super skeptical of law enforcement, super skeptical of traditional power structures. That aspect of the show really stayed with me. When I was pursuing my BEA, originally majoring in politics, I had a professor of democratic theory tell me I gave him the most cynical essays he'd ever read from a liberal arts student. More recently, I got my MA, and one of the last elective classes I did related to examining ethnographies in the South Americas. Several of my free writes referred back to the show. I don't know if that kind of rooted paranoia serves me in any productive way, but it's there, lol. That experience actually led to my X-Files based thesis project, using the show as a framework for examining cultural anxieties and practical/political legislation. It's just part of my life. User The Dog 617 writes, "Haven for the FBI's Most Unwanted was my favorite message board of choice. There really weren't any spoilers like they are these days, so we would record the trailer for the next episode and go second by second as to what we think would happen. Fight the Future Midnight release was really fun too." User Laura Mees writes, "I was 35 in 1993 when the show premiered, so my perspective is a little different. Also, I lived in Los Angeles and was an aspiring television writer. I got very active on the social media of the time because of the X-Files, trying to find my people. The AOL communities, Yahoo groups, all.tv.xfiles, and all.tv.xfiles creative for fanfic were places to be. Even though we had long waits between episodes, you had to be really careful to avoid spoilers. This was especially important between seasons, particularly season 2 to 3 and season 4 to 5. Nevertheless, everyone flocked to our online communities for company and comfort. Because everybody videotaped the episodes as they aired, with widely varying quality, there were occasional misunderstandings about things that were said and done on the show. I think the biggest was that a ton of people thought that Scully put her cross around Mulder's neck at the end of Requiem. We had to wait almost 6 months to find out we were wrong. One of the nicest things to come out of the fandom was, of course, the friendships. One Usenet mailing list, I want to believe, held a large-scale get-together in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I forget why that place was chosen. It was just us fans and online friends, a totally grassroots thing we built purely for the love of the show. User Introvert Epicurean writes, "There was a definite vibe in the UK after Squeeze, Jersey Devil, and Fire that this show was the second coming of the D&D is demonic and brainwashing kids craze. Like, we'd all grown up and were now watching a show about demon possessions and disgusting monster attacks. I was 14 and had been playing D&D for a few years, so I think I was sensitive to the same 'oh, that isn't for you' that my grandparents' generation was spouting. It was in the media and the news a little, but I picked up on it a lot because most of my friends were not allowed to watch. I'm not sure my parents knew exactly what the show was, and I watched in my room for the first season. Then my dad and I watched from season 2 onwards, and he loved it. Well, he was caught up with his Scully craze. Haha. User NJSP2 writes, I was 14 when the show first aired in the UK. I can vividly remember discussing the first episode at school the day after, partly because of the suspense of the ending with a cigarette smoking man walking up the corridor in the Pentagon storage facility, but also because of the candlelit scene where Mulder is inspecting Scully for the marks. Ahem. There were 2 famous issues of FHM and Loaded, magazines that were the forefront of lad culture in 90s Britain, which had Gillian Anderson photo shoots that became very talked about too. Apologies to be crude, but I think that's the honest answer about what teenage boys who were fans of the show were talking about. Also, a year or 2 after the first season aired, the Topps comics made it to the UK. I've still got the first issue with the black pin badge it came with. And the first dozen or so episodes of the first season were released on VHS, and all the fans of the show rushed out to buy them. They never did release the rest here, but they did release special editions of key Myth arc episodes like the end of season 2 and the beginning of season 3. There was also a limited edition evidence case style box you could buy to store them in. I remember rushing out to the shops to get hold of them all the day they got released. This was still pre-Amazon and online ordering, so you had to go to the nearest big town on day 1 or risk them selling out instantly. So there was lots of chat about whether you'd been able to get a hold of them or not. User Naya writes, I was a young teenage girl at the time and active on X-Files messaging boards and Yahoo groups, including being very active on a small M&S shipper group. I mostly remember analyzing every single look Mulder and Scully shared in detail, talking about how in love they were, how much we wanted them to get together, and how much we hated Diana Fowley when that time came around. There were lots of romantic fanfic posts too, the original romantasy, lol. I'm sure there's a chance we also discuss something intelligent, but not counting on it. Smiley face. User WelshGuy78 writes, We believed it was all based on true stories due to the title card in the first episode. It was hugely popular with my age group and like nothing we'd ever seen before. Up to this point, all sci-fi type programs had been really cheap and cheesy. The fact that the X-Files took it seriously and played it straight was a game changer. I was like 14 when it premiered. Up to that point, maybe only Star Trek The Next Generation was the only serious sci-fi show that treated the viewer with respect. Though The X-Files wasn't hard sci-fi, it told stories through a police procedural format, which allowed it to remain fresh, sensible, and watchable, even when it got pretty outlandish. So, while it was something we had never seen before, it still retained enough elements of a regular police TV drama to make it accessible for general audiences. There were no people running around in silly rubber monster suits, for example, which would have put general audiences off. People loved police shows and people loved the paranormal, so it was the perfect mix. And finally, user Evie Diesel says, I was pretty young and have no real hot takes, but what I do have is what I would guess is a common memory / impression among younger millennials. This is a show I used to watch with my dad. I barely understood any of the show, but it holds a special and warm place in my psyche because it was something exciting to share with him. It was a show that my mom despised and my younger siblings feared, but I was the perfect age to be mesmerized by it. Okay, could I have just read those and some other Reddit responses and called it an episode? Sure. But I wanted to walk you through the process of making one of these episodes, to share all the thinking and agonizing that goes on behind the scenes, so to speak. I really wish we had the time to do a proper deep dive into the subject matter and really put those responses into their historical context. But as I have said before, that would require more than just one episode. I guess we'll just add this one to the ever-growing list of topics we totally should discuss on this podcast. My own impression, just going by the things I have read and what I remember from my own childhood, is that people didn't really know what to do with the X-Files. Now we can discuss and analyze the X-Files by comparing it to shows that had come after it, for which the X-Files had paved the way and set the standard for. But in 1993, it must have been very lonely to be the only show on primetime television that dealt with liver-eating mutants and global conspiracies to suppress the knowledge about extraterrestrial life. Science fiction and horror were certainly not a new thing on television, but this show was different from Star Trek, the original Twilight Zone, or even Kolchak, one of the shows that was Chris Carter's inspiration, ironically. The public was not used to a male and female crime solving duo where both parties were equal and where the female lead wasn't reduced to being a love interest. This was a show that took fringe topics like alien abductions and urban legends and put them on every family's TV screen. The only show that one could compare The X-Files to at the time was Twin Peaks. But as I understand it, people had a hard time pinning down that show as well. And that's just what it was like in the US and Europe. Now imagine what it was like watching The X-Files in a newly independent former Soviet state as your TV screens were being flooded with decades worth of Western media. One of those days I'm going to talk about the X-Files phenomenon in my homeland of Kazakhstan, as I remember it. But today is not going to be one of those days. As I have already mentioned, this episode serves as the season 3 finale. It wasn't something I had planned, but things have been changing pretty rapidly here in the real world, and the best thing I can do is adapt. The thing is, I'm going back to school in September, and I'm going to be studying full time, so I won't have the time to work on the podcast the way I have been for the past 2 years, which is why I won't be able to produce a show every month. It's sad, but on the other hand, without the pressure to meet a monthly deadline, I will have more time to do more research and do even deeper deep dives. And if you thought that my writing was too academic before, you ain't seen nothing yet. For now, I will simply say thank you for listening. Thank you for writing back, and thank you for letting me nerd out about a truly niche topic. We celebrated this podcast's 2-year anniversary in June, which means that for 2 years I got to do something I love and share it with my friends. I also want to thank all of the Reddit users who have responded to my inquiry and let me share their answers here on the podcast. Really, really thank you. In the meantime, you can listen to all of the episodes of Fandom X Archive on SoundCloud, Spotify, Podchaser, and YouTube, and on my Substack. I also want to say thank you to my friend Sean from the Hey Danny It's Mulder podcast for his feedback, his notes, and support. You can also join our Discord. It's just a small group of X-Files fans nerding out together about our favorite show. Again, thank you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you some other time. Bye.